The planet Tertius 9 had been classified as seasonally uninhabitable by no fewer than 7 different galactic survey organizations, which was really quite the accomplishment, considering most of them couldn't agree on what constituted breathable atmosphere. But when it came to the Northern Valley region during winter months, they'd all nodded their various appendages in universal agreement. Absolutely not. Do not pass go. Please evacuate in an orderly fashion while you still have all your extremities. The cold didn't creep into the valley. It crashed in like an unwelcome house guest who'd brought all their luggage and planned to stay for 6 months. Temperatures plummeted to -40 degrees, and that was on what the meteorological reports cheerfully termed a warm day. The wind howled through the mountain passes with enough force to relocate small buildings, and the snow fell so thickly that visibility dropped to your hand in front of your face, maybe if you squint. Every civilized species in the known galaxy had a protocol for this sort of weather. Leave. Pack up the weather stations, seal the research outposts, power down the equipment, and get the hell off planet until the universe remembered how thermodynamics was supposed to work. It was sensible. It was logical. It was what any creature with even a basic survival instinct would do when faced with nature's very clear message of "not today, thank you." The humans showed up on a Tuesday. To understand the full scope of galactic bewilderment that followed, one must first appreciate the Galactic Standard Cold Weather Protocol, a document that had been refined over 3,000 years of various species encountering various frozen hellscapes. The protocol was elegant in its simplicity. When environmental conditions exceed species tolerance by a factor of 2 or more, evacuation is mandatory. When conditions exceed tolerance by a factor of 5 or more, the entire planet gets a hazard designation. The valley had exceeded tolerance by a factor of 12. There was technology, of course. Marvelous technology. Climate domes that could maintain tropical conditions in the vacuum of space. Thermal shields that could redirect heat from a sun across light years. Entire orbital habitats where one could sip beverages and watch weather patterns from the safety of temperature-controlled observation decks. The Quilcian had perfected personal environment suits that could keep their cold-blooded physiologies comfortable in absolutely any condition. The Vrin had architectural techniques that could raise a heated compound in under 6 hours. Nobody, and this is important, nobody suggested going outside and just dealing with it. The Vrin research team had been studying the valley's unique geological formations when the winter warnings started screaming across their instruments. Dr. Thexis, the lead xenogeologist, had taken one look at the dropping temperature projections, then another look at the evacuation shuttle, and made what was considered the only rational decision. They loaded every piece of equipment that wasn't bolted down everything else, and launched for orbit before the first snowflake fell. They watched from the safety of their ship as the valley transformed into a crystalline nightmare of ice and wind. Fascinating, Dr. Thexis had noted in the expedition log. The valley will be completely uninhabitable for approximately 180 local days. We shall return in spring to assess geological changes caused by the freeze-thaw cycle. That log entry was dated 3 weeks before the human colony ship arrived. The human vessel, optimistically named the Perseverance, emerged from jump space with all the grace of a dropped brick and immediately started broadcasting settlement intentions to anyone who'd listen. The Vrin ship, still in orbit and still monitoring the frozen valley below, picked up the transmission and responded with what they considered a helpful warning about the current environmental conditions. "Negative temperatures, you say," came the reply from the human ship. The voice sounded almost interested. "How negative are we talking?" Dr. Tertius consulted the latest readings, -43 degrees at present, with wind chill factors driving effective temperature to -60. The valley is experiencing blizzard conditions with zero visibility. We strongly recommend you maintain orbital position until the seasonal shift. There was a pause, then that's Celsius or Fahrenheit. Does it matter? Not really, just curious. Sounds like a normal winter. We're going down, Doctor. The Tertius would later write in a hastily updated log entry that this was the moment they realized they were dealing with a species that had a fundamentally different relationship with self-preservation than the rest of the galaxy. The human landing craft descended through wind that should have torn it apart, through snow that should have frozen its systems, and touched down in the valley with a crunch that could be heard over the howling storm. Watching from orbit with instruments that could barely penetrate the weather conditions, Dr. Tertius and their team stared at their screens in the scientific equivalent of morbid fascination. They'll realize their mistake, one of the junior researchers said hopefully. They'll call for emergency extraction within the hour. I've initiated the rescue protocol timer, another added, pulling up standby procedures. For the record, I'm giving them 45 minutes before they're begging us to pull them out. The rescue timer ran out. Then it reset. Then it ran out again. The humans didn't call for extraction. They opened the cargo bay doors and started unloading equipment. Commander Elena Kowalski was the first human to step onto the frozen valley floor, and her first words were captured by the external audio pickups the Vrin had left scattered around the valley. Well, it's not Manitoba, but it'll do. Next out was Chief Engineer Jackson Umbatha, who took one look around at the blinding snow, the sub-zero temperatures, and the wind that was trying to physically relocate his beard, and said, "Anyone else think this looks like a good place for a settlement?" The 37 other humans on the expedition apparently agreed, because within 20 minutes they'd formed teams and started doing things that made absolutely no sense to the Vrin watching from above. Team 1 started cutting down trees, not carefully harvesting them with precision plasma cutters, but actually swinging primitive axes and manual saws, felling the frost-covered timber with a rhythm that suggested they'd done this before. Team 2 began gathering stones from a nearby frozen stream, prying them loose with metal bars and loading them onto sleds, pulled by humans wearing so many layers of clothing they looked like ambulatory fabric mountains. Team 3 went hunting, with projectile weapons, in a blizzard, and came back 2 hours later, dragging the carcass of something that looked like a cross between a moose and a very surprised bear. "Are they going to eat that?" A Vrin researcher whispered in horror. They were absolutely going to eat that. By nightfall, which arrived with the subtlety of a hammer at 3 in the afternoon, the humans had cleared an area, built fire pits using the gathered stones, and had multiple blazes burning bright against the darkness. The smell of cooking meat drifted up through the atmosphere, detectable even by the Vrin ship's sensors. The 6 watched as the humans gathered around their fires, passing around steaming containers of liquid, their faces illuminated by flickering flames, while the temperature gauge cheerfully reported -48 degrees with no signs of warming. "This is impossible," the 6 muttered. "They should be dead. They should be very, very dead. They're singing," the junior researcher reported, adjusting the audio pickups. "I think it's a song. Something about bells and snow and one-horse open sleighs. That can't be right." "Sleighs," the communications officer corrected. "It's an Earth reference. Apparently it's a vehicle for traveling across snow pulled by quadrupeds. Why would anyone design a vehicle specifically for these conditions?" "I'm beginning to suspect," Dr. Tertius said slowly, that humans have a much longer history with this kind of environment than we initially understood. The first week was when things got truly baffling. The humans didn't just survive. They built. Log cabins started appearing with a speed that defied what the Vrin understood about construction timelines. The humans worked in shifts, some cutting and hauling logs, others notching and fitting them together with a precision that would have impressed any architect. They sealed gaps with a mixture of mud and moss they somehow found beneath the snow. They constructed roofs with overlapping wooden shingles and covered them with packed snow for extra insulation, which seemed counterintuitive until the thermal scans showed the structures maintaining internal temperatures 20 degrees warmer than the outside. Without any power source, just dead trees and manual labor. They're using the snow as insulation, Dr. Tertius said, recalibrating the thermal imaging for the third time because the readings had to be wrong. They're weaponizing the very element that should be killing them. But the cabins were just the beginning. While some humans built structures, others had started a project that the Vrin found particularly disturbing. They were skinning the animals they'd hunted and doing something with the hides. The something turned out to be sewing. A group of humans gathered in the largest completed cabin, sitting in a circle with the animal pelts spread across their laps, pushing curved needles through the tough material with thread made from processed sinew. They were making clothing, actual clothing from animal skins with the fur on the inside for warmth, waterproofed with rendered fat, and decorated with what appeared to be artistic designs because apparently survival wasn't enough. There had to be aesthetics involved too. Why aren't they using their thermal suits? A Vrin researcher asked, watching a human woman shrug into a completed fur coat and immediately look more comfortable. I don't think they brought enough. The communications officer said, reviewing the cargo manifests the humans had filed. The manifest lists thermal suits for emergency use only. The majority of their cold weather gear appears to be fabric, woven plant fibers and compressed animal hair. That's insane. Fabric can't possibly provide adequate protection in these temperatures. The human now wearing the fur coat stepped outside, stood in the -50-degree wind for 20 minutes while chatting with another human, then went back inside looking completely unbothered. I'm starting to think, Doctor, the Tertius said carefully, that we may need to revise our understanding of what humans consider adequate protection. More humans arrived on the second week. The landing craft made 3 trips, bringing down families, more supplies, and bizarrely, children. Small humans who immediately discovered that snow could be compacted into projectile spheres and launched at each other for recreation. The adults didn't stop them. They watched their offspring engage in what amounted to frozen warfare and smiled. Their young are playing in lethal conditions, a researcher noted, with the kind of clinical horror usually reserved for observing particularly gruesome predation. Perhaps they're training them for combat, another suggested. No, I've reviewed the recordings. They're laughing. It's play. Recreational hypothermia. The settlement expanded. Smoke houses appeared, structures where the humans hung strips of meat over smoldering fires, preserving food through a combination of heat, smoke, and the freezing temperatures. Root cellars were dug into the frozen ground, insulated chambers where vegetables and other supplies could be stored without the need for powered refrigeration. Because why use technology when you could just dig a hole in the permafrost and let physics do the work? A human named Margaret established a central cookhouse and started baking bread in an oven made of clay and stones, heated by wood fire. The smell of fresh bread in sub-zero temperatures created an olfactory paradox that the Vrin sensors struggled to process. The six had been taking notes obsessively, filling data files with observations that read less like scientific documentation and more like increasingly frantic attempts to explain the unexplainable. The latest entry simply read, "They've started ice fishing, on purpose, for entertainment." It was true. A group of humans had walked out onto the frozen lake, cut holes through ice that was 3 feet thick, and were now sitting on small portable seats, dropping lines into the frigid water below. They'd brought insulated containers full of hot soup. They were having conversations. One of them had brought a musical instrument and was playing cheerful tunes that drifted across the ice. "That one just caught a fish," the junior researcher reported. "A large one." "They're all celebrating. They seem pleased. Why wouldn't they just use nets, or sonic attractors, or any of the 17 different efficient fishing technologies available?" I don't think efficiency is the point. By the end of the second month, the valley had transformed. What had been an empty, frozen wasteland was now a thriving village of roughly 200 humans. The cabins had multiplied, arranged in a sensible grid pattern around a central commons area. A large structure that the humans called a great hall dominated the center, a massive log building with a stone fireplace that could burn entire trees, and enough interior space for the entire population to gather. They gathered often, for meals, for meetings, for what they called community events that seemed to mostly involve consuming warm beverages, telling stories, and engaging in group singing that ranged from surprisingly beautiful to deliberately terrible. "They're enjoying this, Doctor," the six said, watching another celebration unfold on the screens. "They're not enduring survival conditions, they're having a social gathering in the frozen hellscape." The humans had also started engaging in recreational activities that defied explanation. Skiing, which involved strapping wooden planks to their feet and sliding down snowy hillsides at speeds that would result in serious injury upon any miscalculation. Sledding, which was similar but seemed to involve even less control and more screaming. Ice skating, which meant attaching metal blades to footwear and propelling oneself across frozen surfaces using only balance and momentum. Human children were doing all of these things. The adults encouraged it. "They've domesticated the winter," a researcher said in awe. "They looked at the most hostile seasonal environment on this planet and decided to make entertainment out of it." "I need to update our threat assessment of humans," Dr. Tertius muttered. "Any species that treats this as recreational has a danger threshold I don't think we properly understood." The Quilcian merchant ship arrived in the third month, limping into orbit with a damaged drive core and rapidly depleting fuel reserves. Captain Zilthar sent out a distress signal requesting emergency landing coordinates, and the Vrin helpfully transmitted the location of their original research outpost, which was sealed and automated but had landing facilities. "Negative," Zilthar responded. "Drive system is failing faster than projected. We need to land immediately at nearest flat surface. Transmitting trajectory now." Dr. Tertius looked at the trajectory and felt their respiratory system do something complicated. "Captain, those coordinates will place you directly in the valley. The currently frozen, -50-degree valley inhabited by humans." Inhabited. The briefing said this region was classified uninhabitable during winter months. It was. It is. The humans didn't receive the memo, apparently. "Are you telling me there are beings alive down there right now? Thriving even? It's complicated. Look, you'll need immediate cold weather extraction once you land. We can have a shuttle there within." "Captain," a voice interrupted over the Quilcian channel. "Drive containment is failing. We're going down now." The merchant ship dropped through the atmosphere in a barely controlled descent, trailing plasma and hope in equal measure, and crunched into a snowbank approximately 200 meters from the human village. Emergency protocols activated, sealing the crew inside the wounded ship, where life support could maintain survivable temperatures for perhaps 6 hours before the cold seeped through compromised hull plating. Zilthar was preparing to send out a distress beacon when something tapped on the exterior hatch. Not a random impact from falling ice, but a rhythmic knocking that suggested intelligence and intent. "This is Captain Zilthar of the merchant vessel Profitable Venture. Who is outside?" "Hey there," came a cheerful voice through the hull. "Saw your landing, looked rough. You folks okay in there? Need any help?" "We are functional, but our ship is damaged and cannot maintain life support in these temperatures. We have sent for rescue, but..." "Rescue? From where? Orbit? That'll take forever to get the equipment down here. Listen, our village is just a couple 100 meters that way. We've got heat, food, and hot soup. Why don't you come wait with us while your ship gets sorted out?" Zilthar consulted with the crew. The life support estimates were now down to 5 hours. The orbital rescue would take at least 7 to properly outfit and deploy. The outside temperature is -51 degrees. My species cannot survive more than minutes in such conditions. "Oh right, yeah. Hang on a second." There was muffled conversation outside. "Then, we're coming in. Opening your hatch now. So don't be alarmed." The exterior hatch cracked open, letting in a blast of cold air that felt like physical assault. Zilthar and the crew huddled back, preparing for what would surely be their deaths, when several humans climbed inside carrying what appeared to be bundles of fur. "Here," a large human said, offering Zilthar what looked like a dead animal. "Put this on. It's a coat. Fur side goes in. Don't worry about the smell. You get used to it." "I don't understand." "Clothing. For the cold. We made extras because we figured someone might need them eventually." The humans helped the Quilcian crew into fur coats, fur boots, fur hats, and fur mittens. Then they led them outside, into what Zilthar had been certain would be immediate death, only to discover that wrapped in dead animal skins and following humans through the snow, death seemed surprisingly distant. The village was impossible. That was Zilthar's first coherent thought upon seeing it. Wooden structures with smoke curling from chimneys, warm light glowing through windows, the sound of voices and music drifting across the snow. They were led into the great hall, where a massive fire roared in a stone hearth, and humans offered them steaming bowls of something that smelled unexpectedly edible. "Vegetable soup," a human explained. "Figured you might not eat meat. We've got bread too. Sit, warm up. You're safe here." Safe. In the frozen valley. Because humans had decided it would be so. Zilthar sat near the fire, holding a bowl of hot soup, surrounded by humans who were treating a lethal winter storm outside like mild inconvenience, and had a small crisis of understanding about their place in the galaxy. Zilthar finally asked, "How are you alive here?" The humans exchanged glances. Then Commander Kowalski, who Zilthar would learn was the settlement leader, smiled. "We've done this before. Many times, actually. On Earth, we had a whole thing called the Ice Age, lasted about 2.5 million years. We lived through it. Not just survived, lived. We developed tools, techniques, social structures. We learned to work with the cold instead of against it. But you have technology. Why not use it?" "We are using technology. Fire is technology. Clothing is technology. Architecture is technology. These are just older, more reliable technologies that don't need power cells or maintenance schedules." Plus, Kowalski added with a grin, "There's something satisfying about building things with your hands." about knowing you can survive with just skills and determination. You're insane, Exilthar said, without heat. Your entire species is insane. Probably, Kowalski agreed cheerfully. But we're warm and well-fed, so it's working out pretty well. Word of the impossible village spread through the local shipping lanes like a very confused wildfire. Other ships started stopping by, not for emergencies but out of curiosity. They'd land, get shown around by enthusiastic humans, be offered hot beverages and fresh bread, and leave with stories about the species that decided frozen death valleys made excellent real estate. Dr. Thexis finally accepted an invitation to visit the surface in the 4th month. They descended in a properly heated shuttle, wore a complete environmental suit rated for twice the current cold, and still felt desperately uncomfortable the moment they stepped outside. The humans met them wearing fur coats and cheerful expressions. "Welcome to New Frost," Commander Kowalski said, gesturing at the village. "We've named the settlement, took a vote and everything. New Frost won by 3 votes over Absolutely Not and Margaret's Mistake, though that second one was mostly a joke." "How are you doing this, Doctor?" the Exis asked, the question that had been consuming them for months finally emerging. "Not just surviving, but thriving. My species has a saying, when the universe says no, the wise listen. You've built a town in a place where the universe is screaming no." Kowalski laughed. "That's the thing, Doc. Earth said no to us for most of our existence. Ice ages, droughts, floods, predators, diseases. We survived anyway. We learned to adapt, to innovate, to be stubborn. You know what humans did during the Little Ice Age on Earth. A period where global temperatures dropped and crops failed, and everyone thought the world was ending. What? We invented better agriculture techniques, developed new food preservation methods, built warmer houses, created art and music and culture. We didn't just endure the cold, we lived through it and came out the other side with recipes for hot chocolate and traditional winter festivals." The Exis looked around at the village, at children building snow sculptures, at adults working on cabin expansions, at smoke curling from chimneys against the grey sky. "You've had practice at this. Millennia of practice." "Exactly. This valley isn't hostile to us. It's just winter. And we're really, really good at winter." They walked through the village, and Dr. Thexis observed everything with fresh perspective. The root cellars that used the frozen ground as natural refrigeration, the smoke houses that preserved meat without power, the communal spaces that fostered social bonds and shared resources, the clothing made from local materials, the architecture that worked with the environment instead of trying to dominate it. It was elegant, sustainable, proven by thousands of years of human history in cold climates. "We're writing new guidelines for human settlement assessment," Dr. Thexis admitted. "The old ones clearly don't apply. What we consider uninhabitable, you consider Tuesday. We'd appreciate that," Kowalski said. "We've got 17 more ships scheduled to arrive next month with new settlers. Turns out a lot of humans are looking for a place to build something real, something that doesn't rely on technology that can fail. We're expecting to hit 500 residents by summer. You're staying. Through the summer. Through the next winter. Of course, this is home now. Spring arrived eventually, because even frozen hellscapes can't maintain absolute hostility forever. The temperatures rose above freezing. The snow began to melt. The valley transformed from white to green with a speed that caught everyone off guard. "Doctor," the Thexis expected the humans to immediately pivot to modern technology now that the immediate survival pressure was gone. Surely they'd install climate control systems, upgrade to standard galactic housing, replace their primitive methods with civilized comforts. The humans planted crops. in the ground. Using manual tools, they expanded the village, building more cabins using the same log construction techniques. They established a sawmill powered by a water wheel in the now flowing stream. They started a dairy operation with local grazing animals they'd somehow domesticated over the winter. "Why aren't you upgrading?" Dr. Tertius asked during their regular visits, which had somehow become weekly check-ins and social calls. Margaret, who was now running what amounted to the village bakery and restaurant, laughed while pulling fresh bread from her clay oven. "Upgrade to what? Everything we've built works. It's sustainable. It doesn't depend on supply chains from 3-star systems away. If we have a problem, we can fix it ourselves with materials we can source locally. But the cold will return. In 6 months the valley will freeze again, and we'll be ready," Kowalski added, joining the conversation with a mug of something hot and fragrant. "We've learned the patterns. We know what works. Next winter will be even easier because we'll have more prepared food stores, better insulated buildings and experience. We've done the hard part. Now we just maintain." "You're choosing this," Dr. Tertius said, understanding finally crystallizing. "You could request modern infrastructure, but you're actively choosing this lifestyle. It's not just lifestyle, Doc. It's philosophy. Humans spent most of our history being told we couldn't do things, couldn't fly, couldn't cure diseases, couldn't leave our planet, couldn't survive in hostile environments. We proved all of that wrong by refusing to accept limitations as permanent. This valley is us proving it again." The Galactic Settlement Bureau updated their classifications 3 months later. Tertius IX's northern valley was redesignated from seasonally uninhabitable to human-compatible with appropriate preparations. The notation included several thousand words of explanation about traditional cold weather survival techniques, manual construction methods, and the importance of not underestimating human tolerance for discomfort. The waiting list for new residents at New Frost reached 2,000 families. Other species started visiting, not as observers but as students. The Vryn sent an expedition to study human building techniques. The Quilsian requested instruction in primitive food preservation. An entire delegation from a species that had never experienced real winter showed up asking to learn how to build fires, because apparently some concepts transcended technological advancement. The kits sat in the Great Hall during their 6th visit, drinking hot cider and watching humans teach aliens how to sew fur clothing, and realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Humans weren't adapting to galactic standards. They were teaching the galaxy that there were other ways to survive. Older ways, proven ways, ways that didn't require accepting the universe's no as final. "You know what I find most amusing about all this, Doctor?" the kits said to Kowalski, who was sitting nearby reviewing expansion plans for the village. "What's that?" Every species in the galaxy looked at this valley in winter and declared it impossible to inhabit, wrote it off completely, classified it as a hostile zone to be avoided, and humans just moved in. Built a town, made it work. That's humanity in a nutshell. Kowalski agreed. "We see impossible and think challenge accepted. It's going to change how we approach colonization. Every planet we've written off as too extreme, every environment we've declared unsurvivable without massive technological infrastructure, we're going to have to reassess. Because if humans can build a thriving village in these conditions using primitive techniques, what else have we prematurely dismissed?" Kowalski smiled, the kind of smile that suggested she'd been waiting for this realization. "Welcome to the human perspective, Doc. The universe is a lot more habitable than most species think. You just have to be willing to work with it instead of demanding it work for you. Outside, snow had started falling again. Not the blizzard conditions of deep winter, but a gentle autumn snowfall that suggested the cold season was approaching once more. The humans of New Frost looked up at the sky, smiled at each other, and went about their business of gathering firewood, checking food stores, and preparing for another winter. Because that's what humans did. They prepared, they adapted. They built fires against the cold, sewed furs against the wind, and raised villages in places the rest of the galaxy had abandoned as impossible. The cold took the valley, yes, but the humans had taken it back, one hand-hewn log and one fur-lined coat at a time, proving once again that the difference between uninhabitable and home was simply a matter of human stubbornness and a willingness to work for it. Doctor, the Kits filed their final report on New Frost with a single concluding observation that would be quoted in xenoanthropology texts for generations. When faced with environmental conditions that every rational species avoids, humans build a tavern and invite their neighbors over for soup. This may be the most terrifying aspect of their psychology, or the most admirable. Possibly both. Human compatible, the classification now read. The valley that said no had learned what the rest of the galaxy was still figuring out. Humans don't take no for an answer. They just light a fire, put on a coat, and get to work making the impossible into Tuesday afternoon. And somewhere in orbit, the next colony ship was already requesting landing coordinates, because word had spread that New Frost had excellent bread, and humans who actually knew how to survive without depending on technology that could fail at the worst possible moment. The cold had taken the valley. The humans had built a civilization in response. That seemed about right.